Hey there, Andrew here with South Appalachian weather. Bit overdue, but something that I want to start doing as we head through into each season. A bit of a winter roundup or winter report, as well as a transition over into our spring season here for 2026. So when I'm recording this is the first week of March 2026. And before we talk about the spring and some of what we might be able to expect out of our spring weather, I wanted to take a few minutes and go through some of what we dealt with already through this winter, and of course also remembering winter's still technically not over yet for another few weeks. So first of all, we have, of course, the ice storm, or in a lot of our region, the lack of ice storm that we had on January 21st. Now, one of the big things about this is I've been going over the data and looking at why did we get the conditions that we had. Now, first of all, there were confirmed reports of ice along the southern slope of the Appalachians, down in southern Towns and Union counties, as well as a little bit of southern Fannin County, although there's not much population down where the reports were coming in from the power companies, and then also a little bit in southern Gilmer County, down around Ellijay, and more correctly south of Ellijay. And down there was probably the hardest hit of our entire region. Elsewhere, it was very spotty at best. And from looking at the information, looking at the data, one of the biggest things that protected the bulk of our region was slightly higher dew points than were forecast. So if you take a look at this graphic, one of the things to bear in mind about an ice storm, really any winter precipitation, is it depends on what's going on through the entire column of the atmosphere. So you can see winter precipitation can take the form of everything from cold rain to freezing rain or an ice storm to sleet to snow. And one of the big things is for freezing rain, you have to have ambient temperatures, so the thermometer temperature, be just at or below freezing. But then you also have to have dew points that are significantly below freezing. So we're not talking about just a couple of degrees below freezing. So, say dew points 28 to 30. You got to have dew points in the low 20s. And what happens is when you have dew points like that, this thing called latent heat comes into play. Because as the air is drier, it basically forces that water to cool. And water that's already very close to the freezing point is going to cool and freeze to ice. Now, also as part of that, transitioning to the other factor that we had come into play across most of our region is the layers in the atmosphere, the layers of temperature. You may have heard during that time forecasters talking about a warm nose, and that's critical if you're going to have an ice storm take effect or come into play. But we had something else going on in the layers of the atmosphere. This picture was actually taken by someone I know in Blairsville during the afternoon leading into when we had that ice storm forecast. And this is looking towards Brasstown Bald. The problem is you can't see it because it's covered in clouds. What that means is the condensed layer of the atmosphere was very low and was actually below our mountaintop layers, which means everything above what you're seeing there. And again, bear in mind, some of this is opinion on my part, but what you're looking at there, from everything I can see and everything I could observe that day, you're looking at the lifted condensation layer or cloud floor being below some of the highest mountain peaks. What that means is, based on everything I could see that day, the mountain peaks were going to get snow, not even rain, because there was nothing above freezing higher than that point. Then below that point, and I know this for a reason, and we'll get to this in a second, we actually had multiple layers, not just a warm nose. And the reason is because earlier in the day we had sleet. Now, if you remember that graphic I just showed a minute ago, sleet occurs when you have an area of very cold, which is always there in the atmosphere, that forms snowflakes in the clouds. Then you have a warmer layer below that melts those snowflakes into liquid water. Then a colder layer below that that is cold enough to freeze those water drops or raindrops before they reach the ground. And that's what we had. And what that means then, because that sleet was falling when the temperatures were above freezing at the ground level, because I personally observed it. There were also some observations elsewhere across the region that observed it. What that means is, instead of just this nice 3-layer system in the atmosphere, we actually had 4. The way I described it is, instead of a sandwich, we had a layer cake. And then the wind picked up. And when the wind picked up, the best way I could describe it is that layer cake turned into a smash cake. Just like a 1-year-old birthday party. That entire set of layers, which was in our valleys, it was all below the mountaintop levels, stirred around. We already had higher dew points. Now we have this mixing of different layers of the atmosphere, and the temperature started to go up, and they stayed largely above freezing. They touched freezing, they were just below freezing, but that combination of slightly higher dew points than expected and slightly higher temperatures than expected, plus the mixing, plus all these other factors, ultimately it yielded most of our region getting no actual accumulated ice at the end of the day. Now, another quick description or discussion of what also went on during that day is, late in the evening, after the sun went down, the temperature did start to drop below freezing a little bit. And as the rain continued to fall, we had a period of what I described, and again, this is not a scientific description, but it's the only thing I can think of. We had a period of what I call thick water. Now, when I'm talking about thick water, if you were outside during that time period, you know what I was talking about. Because thick water is when the water is very, very close to freezing. If you touch it, you can tell it's trying to freeze. It's doing things that water doesn't normally do. It's starting to act like the consistency of maple syrup, and water doesn't usually do that. So all of that came together to where we did have some periods across pretty much the entire region of a little bit of icing, but then it melted right back again as everything else took effect. The dew points rose above freezing, and finally the temperature settled above the freezing point as well, because the air was completely saturated. So that was the ice storm. Again, areas to our south, areas to our east got hit hard, but we really didn't get anywhere near what was expected across our region out of that particular system. Now, we did have a couple of other systems, and this is where I will say I got some things wrong. Again, the whole purpose and whole focus of this channel is honesty and as close as we can to accuracy, but when we're not at accuracy, honesty about that. Going into the 1st of February, we had a snowstorm. I will admit, I underestimated how much snow we were going to get. The reason for that, not an excuse, just an explanation on my part. I was headed out of town. I had to get that out before I really wanted to, a couple days before I wanted to, but I had to go with the best available information, because where I was going to be, I wasn't necessarily going to have internet coverage to even be able to give that report. I was actually out west in the state of Utah at the time. So that's what that was about. I had some uncertainty. I tried to convey that. Hopefully I did convey that clearly. But even with that, there were some reports as much as 8 inches of snow in the Brasstown area. And that was significantly higher than anywhere else around. And I'm still working on trying to figure out an explanation for that, trying to do some research. It may take a few more storm events before we can find out what really went on with that, if we have anything similar. But all that to say, again, part of that is my bad for not explaining that there may be a higher amount of snow than I was expecting at that time. But that was what went on there. It was in the middle of a lot of stuff going on. Now, also, finally, on February 23rd, we also had a snow event. I did not put together a briefing on it because we weren't really expecting greater than 1 inch of accumulation anywhere in the region. But a few places did get it anyway. Tusquity Wilderness, Topton in Cherokee County, North Carolina in particular, got a couple of inches of snow. And then there was also some areas on the west end of Cherokee County on some of the ridges that run north-south that also picked up a trace technically of snow, but spots had as much as about a half of an inch. I don't know about anywhere else. I didn't see any reports anywhere else, but a lot of that was due to what is called upsloping, where, and this is something unique to our region of the country, because the ground, as you go from west to east, the direction most of the weather comes from west to east, the ground is going upwards. It can force things to condense. You may remember hearing about in school the rain shadow effect that happens out west in the Sierras. That is a very, very similar mechanism. And so we can have snow, and we can also, when it's not cold, we can have increased rainfall amounts in areas that are on ridge tops, and especially in the eastern end of our region, including towns and clay counties. So just bear that in mind. That was what was going on there, and that's why I didn't do a briefing. In hindsight, I should have. I should have spotted that upsloping scenario, that was a possibility. But again, just keep that in mind. That was what was going on there. So got some things wrong this winter, got some things right this winter as far as the ice storm is concerned. But all of this comes down to more research, more information is needed. And that brings me to the roundup part of this and a couple parting notes for winter, hopefully parting notes at least, unless we have some late season cold snaps, which are always a possibility. Dogwood and blackberry winter are still on the way. So we've still got some colder weather on the way, I would think, over the next few weeks. But right now, let's enjoy this warmer weather while we can. But as I mentioned with the research, one of the ways that you can help with getting information to be more accurate in this area is actually with snow and ice reports. You can send them directly to the email address for the channel, which I'll put on the screen, southappwx@gmail.com. Preferably, if you want to send a report to me directly, that would be with a ruler or tape measure, and use that to verify the measurements. Now, don't take them on a deck or a railing or in heavy leaves or under trees or anything like that. If you're going to measure snow or ice, you want it to be out in the open, and you want to be making sure that you're not pushing the measurement device, whatever that might be, deep into the ground. You want to make sure you're just measuring snow, because otherwise that information will be inaccurate and you'll be increasing the amount compared to what actually fell. Now, if you want to do things in a more official sense as far as winter weather and also rainfall, a good resource is CoCoRaHS, and that's spelled CoCoRaHS, again, on the screen. Take a look at their free training. Even if you don't participate in the program, you can still get some excellent training on how to measure rainfall and how to measure winter weather. But if you do want to participate, you can get a rain gauge from them, a official rain gauge. They have instructions on where to put it, all of that, and you can report that information to them. They report that information directly to the Weather Service. And I've actually used that information for confirmation here over this winter of how much snowfall occurred. We don't have a lot of folks across our region reporting, though, so the more the merrier, literally. If you're interested in it, if you want to make it a homeschool project, if you want to make it a school science project, if you're just interested in it in any way, that's definitely a great resource to help me out, to help the guys at the Weather Service out, and help our entire region get some better information about what truly is going on. Now, enough with the ad and the sales pitch there for their stuff. Now the transition to spring. Again, March 1st is technically the beginning of meteorological spring. And if you paid any attention to the news over the last few days, the spring storm season has already begun across Tornado Alley. So, given we're on the fringe of what's referred to as Dixie Alley, or the other Tornado Alley here in the South, one thing to bear in mind as we transition to spring is it is our biggest tornado and severe weather season. So, make sure you have a plan for sheltering if you are in a tornado warning. Now, if you have a mobile home or anything like that, you're going to want a site-built structure. Mobile homes are not safe in a tornado. Vehicles are not safe in a tornado. So if you live in a mobile home, one good idea is have a plan to stay with friends or family if a tornado watch is issued. A tornado watch being in advance of a tornado warning. Another thing to bear in mind is now is a really good time to clean out gutters and drainage systems, just to make sure that you don't have any thing backing up. I've been doing that on my own property. Now that we've gone into this transition where we'll be getting more rainfall, thankfully drought-busting rainfall as we go into this spring season. Trimming trees back might also be a good idea if you've got the time and you have anything that needs some attention. And then also, something else to bear in mind, if you don't have one, is getting a weather radio, which is a really good backup source of severe weather information and warnings, especially at night when you may not be paying attention to phones, or they may be off, or if you have some kind of communication outage or something like that. I know they are available at Lowe's, which we have 2 Lowe's in our region, one in Ellijay, Georgia, and one in Murphy, North Carolina. So bear that in mind, but you can also get them online. So again, just something to think about as we're prepping here for this spring severe weather season. Now, because it has been so cold, there's a possibility that somebody, and when I say somebody, I don't mean necessarily our region, but somewhere across the U.S., there's probably going to be a pretty decent outbreak of tornadoes sometime this spring season. But the thing is, and this has been very rightly said, there's times where forecasters have a difficult time getting the weather right 3 hours out. So when we're talking about a 3-month season, making claims about any particular area or any kind of, oh, here we go again kind of stuff, there's no skill in that. There's no accuracy in that. I can say there's a chance of tornadoes because seasonally there always is. But exactly where, exactly when, that remains to be seen. We'll be looking at that very closely as we head through the next few weeks and next few months. Lord willing, we won't really have much, but it's always worth bearing in mind with this part of the country that we live in. So that's the wrap up. That's the wrap up, hopefully, of this winter. Hopefully we're not going to be dealing with any more significant winter weather, but if we are, stay tuned to the channel here. If we're going to be dealing with any kind of severe weather, whether severe thunderstorms or tornadoes, I'll have briefings here on the channel about that. So bear that in mind as well. But stay safe out there. Take care of any prep. And again, enjoy this warmer weather as we're thawing out from what has really truly been one of the coldest winters we've had in this area in about the last 10 years.